All right, sir.
No problem, ma.
Yes, I'm multi login now.
Okay, ma.
Yes, sir.
Okay, ma.
Sir.
Yeah, your co-host, Ellie, start. You can ask.
Okay, sir. So, good morning, class. I believe you can hear me. If you can, quickly put it on the chat so that I can know you can hear me. So, let's start. And I believe you can see my screen. So, good morning. I believe you can hear me and you can see my screen. All right, so let's start. I just want to confirm you can see the screen. All right, Dr. Oyelami, can you see my screen so that I'll be sure?
Yes, we can see your screen. We can see your desktop.
All right. Okay, thank you, sir. All right, so let's quickly round up with the elasticity of demand and supply. So where we stopped last week, we were on elasticity, and I was explaining the different types and the shape of the graph when you are to explain with graph, as well as the coefficient. When is it elastic? When is it inelastic? When it is perfectly elastic and when it is perfectly inelastic. And I gave specific examples on the shape. So that of supply as well. Like I said, I explained that of demand in detail. And I want to believe that when you are comparing that with supply, you know that you need to explain with a graph that is upward sloping. And like I said, when you say elastic, inelastic, it depends on the shape. For an elastic one, if you look at this graph, for unitary elastic, it is like I gave example of a perfect square that if you are dividing it into two equal triangle, it will explain what the curve of a unitary elastic supply is. And like that of demand too, when you use it, but for demand, it is downward sloping, but for supply, it is upward sloping from, from the left to the right. Now, if you are looking at this, any change in price, and you look at the horizontal, the vertical distance of the price change with the horizontal distance of the quantity response, you will see that it is exactly the same for a unitary elastic supply. But for elastic supply, if you look at this second graph here, it shows that you have a flatter supply curve, a flatter supply curve that will show you clearly that any vertical distance in the price change is not as much as it's not as much as the horizontal distance of the quantity change. So whatever, if you look at the difference, if you are to draw a price change, for instance, a change from P0 to P1 on these vertical axis, you will notice that such change may not be up to the change in the quantity response. So when you have quantity responding far higher than that price change, then we have elastic supply. It is elastic. So like I explained with that of demand, elastic supply has a flatter supply curve. And for inelastic supply, we have a steeper. The right word there is steeper. So let me just quickly put it in here for you to, this explain, if it is explained with a flatter curve, why this is a steeper curve. Now for the two, for these two, what you should just bear in mind is, if you have a flatter one, definitely it shows that we have more response on the horizontal axis. But for a steeper one, it shows that the response on the horizontal axis is not as much as that of the price change. So it is inelastic because it simply shows that when price change or when price move, quantity supplied, it did not respond as much as that price move. And like that of demand, the perfectly elastic supply and perfectly inelastic supply, they are the same explanation, because for the perfectly elastic supply, we have an infinitely elastic curve, a perfectly horizontal curve that shows that any deviation from price change, you will see quantity demand supply responding. Like that of demand, like we explained last week, you will see quantity supply responding to that change in price. And the typical example I gave, I will still explain it again for us to understand it better. The typical example I gave is that you are so used to maybe demanding at a particular price, or you are so used to supplying at a particular price, but any change or any little or marginal deviation from that price that you are used to will make quantity supplied to respond in an infinite way. So you see, I gave example of just like a percent change in price leading to maybe more than 50% or 100% or over 100% response in the quantity supply. And like that of demand, it's always in the same range of explanation. When you have a slight change, people run away from, but any price change, you see a situation where the response of the quantity you are demanding for respond in an infinite way. And for the last one, perfectly inelastic, like I said, no matter what the level of the price is, the price could be up here, the price could be down here. No matter the level of price change, you see that the quantity supply remains, what you are still supplying is what you still supply. So any explanation concerning quantity supply or response of supply to any change, you will see situation where you will see situation where you will see situation where the response will just be the same. So like we indicate here, the coefficient for perfectly inelastic supply is equal to 0, while that of perfectly elastic is equal to infinity. And for inelastic, we have it less than 1. For elastic, we have it greater than 1. So far, we have been able to cover the theory of demand and the theory of supply, and the what is the difference between change in demand and change in quantity demanded, change in supply and change in quantity supplied. Now we will quickly, and as far as elasticity is concerned, I've been able to at least explain the different types. Now there are some things I want us to take note. When we say types of elasticity, you can identify the types in terms of what the extent to which it is changing. That is when you would mention unitary elastic, but when you are trying to identify elasticity in terms of what factor is changing, so like I was saying, when you are trying to identify what factor it's responding to or which factor is not responding to, then we will identify when it's responding to price change. That's when we have price elasticity of supply. And when we identify the response to income change, we have income elasticity. Then when we have response to the prices of other related goods, then we have cross price. And that is more noticeable when we are talking about elasticity of demand. But for that of supply, we talk about those, especially the price elasticity of supply. So with this, let's quickly see when we talk about equilibrium. Equilibrium. But if you have any question on the parts, we have taken the types of supply, types of demand. But before we talk about equilibrium, if you have any question on those other aspects that we have touched, you can chip it in. You can put it in the chat. I will try to be checking the chat to know your question. So if you, in the absence of any question on the ones that we have taken so far, let's quickly look at what we mean by equilibrium. Now, equilibrium as a concept simply means states, it simply exists when the quantity of goods and services demanded equals to the quantity supplied at a particular price. And equilibrium as a concept is a very key concept in economics. Why do we say it is a very key concept? Because it's more or less like consider the consumer's side as well as the supplier's side, and it tries to bring them to par. So when we are saying that, which price are you willing to pay, and which price are the consumers, the suppliers willing to give, then the point of agreement between the suppliers and the consumers is where we have equilibrium. So there are key things from the point here. We have this graph. From a typical graph of equilibrium, when you look at the demand curve that is downward sloping, and you look at the supply curve that is upward sloping. We identify three major things with equilibrium. We identify the equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, and then the equilibrium point. So a typical question could ask you that you should show the equilibrium point. Definitely you will know that for you to show, it has to be through graph. So if you have two equations, the demand equation and the supply equation that tries to test your knowledge on equilibrium, when you calculate it and you have equilibrium price with equilibrium quantity, and the questions go further to ask for the equilibrium point, you need to show that through a graph. So I will want us to quickly identify two other concepts. Everything that you see here in this material, that is any concept that you see here that is bolding, it means pay attention to that concept. So the concept of equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, equilibrium point, you should take note. So we have equilibrium quantity. Let me just hold in that. So that is another concept you need to take note of. Then that of points, you can't show it without the graph. So it is here, equilibrium point 2, you will show it. Then note that any point above the equilibrium point will lead to what we call excess supply, and any point below the equilibrium point will lead to what we refer to as excess demand. Now, what do we mean by excess demand and excess supply? Those are other concepts that we want us to take note of. When we say equilibrium, if you look at this point, this is the demand curve that slopes downward. And when we say we have a point above the equilibrium point, any point above the equilibrium point, if you look at the equilibrium point, this is it. If you have any point here that is above this equilibrium, so assuming you are here, it definitely means if you trace it to the price axis, we have higher price. If you also trace it to the quantity axis, we also have higher quantity. But what it means, we will identify it more in the graph that follows. So let me go to the graph that explains that. So the equilibrium position can be affected by any change in either demand or supply. Now, if we have a change in demand, this graph simply shows a change in demand. Now, for a change in demand, if you look at the demand curve that slopes downward, we have D0, D0. That is the initial demand curve. Now, any movement from D0 to D1, it simply means there is an increase in demand. Increase in demand. And for a typical consumer, once we have a situation where demand increases, people are demanding for more. What happens to equilibrium from this initial position is that once we have a shift in demand curve upward, indicating an increase in demand, you will see that the associated price to that is higher price and higher quantity. So while the supply curve that slopes upward still remains the same, there is nothing like S0 and S1 here. The supply curve is only one, it remains the same. But we see situation where only the demand curve move upward from left to the right. Now we shift upward and we see that the initial equilibrium is here at PEQE. But the movement upward or the shifting upward moves the equilibrium point to a new point here, the equilibrium price to P1 here, and the equilibrium quantity to Q1. So as a result of increase in demand, the new equilibrium price and quantity are now P1 and Q1. Also, for a change in supply, the supply curve will shift and the new equilibrium position will also change. Now, this example, this graph only shows an increase in demand. Now, I want us to quickly put this question down. What will happen to equilibrium? What will happen to equilibrium if you are putting it down, or let me just put it in our chart, in the chart to everyone. What will happen to equilibrium? So I hope you are taking notes of the question. To equilibrium, when both demand and supply decrease. So take note of that question. Take note of the question. All right, so let's move on. So that is not for you to submit, it's just for you to take note of that. Now I want to ask few of us to unmute so that before we move on to the next thing we have outstanding, we will know whether we have one or two questions. Do we have any questions so far? I don't know whether you can unmute yourself, but if you can, okay. Hakeem, can you unmute yourself? If you can unmute yourself, you should.
Okay, ma'am. I can. A
We are
question in
listening.
the last, yes. A question in the last class, you mentioned about demand. What can cause a demand to increase, and the quantity will also increase. And you actually did not mention a typical example of that.
Let me get your question. I didn't get
I
your
said in the
question.
last, okay, I said that in the last class, you asked us like, what can cause a demand to increase and the quantity is also increase at the same time.
What
Why
can
the other, what can cause the price to increase and the quantity to increase? In the quantity demanded, like the price will increase and the quantity will also increase at the same time. And I'm asking us to give like
price increase?
examples. Like everybody was bringing out their own
I
example, but you don't give whether the example was just still correct.
okay, if I can get your question, don't mute yet. If I can get your question right, you said price increase and quantity demanded also increase. When it is supposed to be, if price increase, quantity demanded should decrease. A typical example of that is when we are talking about abnormal demand or the second law of demand, where you expect that once there is price increase, quantity demanded should decrease. But in a situation where you have price increase, we have quantity demanded also increasing, we have commodities or goods that have peculiar characteristics that behave in that way. And a typical example is when we identify luxurious goods. And the other extreme end of such is when we have given good or inferior goods, where price decreases and quantity demanded also decreases. So there are some things that could make people to respond in that. I've already given example of luxurious goods. And another thing that could lead to that is when we experience expectation, where people expect that if there is a price increase now, it could increase more. Rather than decreasing demand, they demand for more. They increase demand in the immediate in reaction to that price increase, because they expect that price increase in the present may still increase more. So expectation too. So it depends on the line or the direction of the expectation that can also make it to behave in the abnormal way. So those are typical examples of when we identify abnormal situation. So I believe that answered your question. Any other person asking question? So if you are asking question, please raise up your hand. All right. So I just want to quickly share the outline within few seconds to see whether there is any aspect we have left out. So let's see the outline. So in the outline, we still have, if you still want to ask question, you can ask while we quickly look through the outline. So now in the outline, under the 5th topic so far, we have been able to cover this: laws of demand and supply, the determinants of demand and supply, types of demand and supply, then the elasticity of both demand and supply, market equilibrium, then the graphical and mathematical approach. That mathematical approach, we will see, I will quickly see an example that I can bring up for us to quickly, I think that's the only understanding. This last one, effect of shift in demand and supply. Now, the effect of shift in demand and supply is what I have already asked you. I've already explained that, and I asked that you should see when there is a change in both demand and in supply, how will it affect equilibrium? So effect on equilibrium. Now, the only outstanding thing is that mathematical aspect. So let me see if it is something we can quickly that I can quickly explain as we round up. So for the calculation of equilibrium, if you have a demand equation, let me just give example of QD. We have QD is equal to, let's say, 100 minus 0.2 P. A demand equation given as 100 minus 0.2 P. Now, and we have a supply equation given as, let's say, maybe 250 plus maybe 0.7 P. Now, for equilibrium, what is equilibrium? Equilibrium price and quantity. Now, even before we move on, let me just quickly explain what we mean by demand equation. A typical demand equation will show you clearly that the relationship between demand and quantity demanded, a typical relationship between demand and price is inverse, indicating that as price is going up, quantity demanded is coming down. A typical supply equation will show you clearly that as price is going up, quantity supply is also going up. So when you see plus, it shows a typical supply equation. When you see minus, it shows you a typical demand equation. And when you are asked what is equilibrium, price, and quantity. Now for this question, the typical demand equation, you equate it with, let me just put it this way. What you just do is equate is equal to, let me change it, is equal to the supply equation. So if you quickly attempt this now, these are just hypothetical questions that you can come on. It simply means you equate this with this. Equate the demand equation with the supply equation. And once you do that, you will arrive at a definite price. So let's attempt that. That is, you have 100 is equal to the supply equation. So when you have 100 equal to 100 minus 0.2p is equal to 250 plus 0.7p, making p the subject of the formula. Let's make p this subject of the formula. So what do you have? You have minus 0.2p, then minus, because once you move 0.7p to the other side of this equation, to the left side, it becomes minus 0.7p. So when you have that, then you have equal to, you have 250. When the plus 100 comes to this other side, it becomes minus 100. So let's see what we have. We have minus 0.9p is equal to, that will be 150. So let's calculate that. P will be what? So we have P equals to SCP equals to 150 divided by 0.9. So you are going to ignore the negative sign because these are just hypothetical figure. P is equal to 150 divided by 0.9. So once we calculate that, whatever figure it gives you the what the price is. So let's identify what P is. 150 divided by 0.9, what value it gives you. Then you go back to slot it into either the substitute P. Substitute P in either the demand or supply function to get equilibrium quantity. So this is just a typical example of the mathematical way of explaining equilibrium. So a sample question. So Let's see. Any question? Okay, that is somebody, the people that have been responding to change that question of what we have when we have a shift in both demand and supply. Now, let me go back to that question. Let me move up. Thomas Daniel, hold on. Somebody said in the chat, your response is when we have both demand and supply changing. Somebody said we have constant equilibrium. Sorry, let me get that right. Is that the response of the person? Constant equilibrium? Let's see the response. Thomas Daniel, I didn't ask you to put down your hand. I said just hold on. So price is 166. Can we approximate it to 167? So if price is 167, can we slot it into both demand and supply equation and see what we have? If you have the absolute value, because we can't have a negative value for price. Thomas, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, good morning, my question is, I don't still understand that shift. Are you saying that when demand change in the equilibrium curve, the demand curve will shift from left to right, or how?
When there is what? Sorry, let me get your question right, Thomas. Thomas, I can't hear you. Are you still asking the question? Okay, let me just clearly explain. If I want to believe that I understand your question, just let me, if you at all you look at the first graph here, I've moved. This is just the state of equilibrium. But like I said, that any change in either demand or supply will affect equilibrium. So it depends on the direction of the change. So if you have a shift in demand from the initial one can be, it can shift up, it can shift down. So, but the assumption is that if we have a shift upward, it simply means it will move from here to somewhere here. And with such movement, we have higher price and higher quantity, and the equilibrium point will also change. But assuming the shift is downward, it simply means it will move from here to here. And once it is down here, it simply means we have the equilibrium also moving to somewhere here, because where it touches the supply curve will also be affected once the supply curve remains the same. But the question I asked you is that if peradventure we have both shift in demand and supply, if we have both shifts, demand shifted, supply also shifted, what will happen to equilibrium? That was the question I asked, and some of you are already responding. But I saw someone's response that says that we have constant, I think constant equilibrium. I just want to confirm what exactly that person's response was. Let me see, the person said constant. So I just want to confirm it's not possible for it to be constant, because definitely I can't find that person that says. I've shifted. Sorry, somebody is trying to clarify who knows the topic of the class. I have rounded up with elasticity. I started with that, and I just rounded up with it. I'm just explaining equilibrium now. and I'm rounding up with equilibrium. So for that person that asked that question, it is elasticity first and then equilibrium we are rounding up. So I believe that answered your question. So we are presently on equilibrium, and we identified three: equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, and equilibrium points. So that those are the three. I believe that answered your question. So I'm trying to see the response to some of us that have already put in answers. All right, so I can't readily find that person's response now, but but Rahim, you can unmute yourself and ask your question while I'm still looking through.
Oh, so I'm the one that write the stuff you're looking for. I mean, constant equilibrium price.
Is that the response to the question I asked on the chat?
Yes, ma'am.
That if both demand and supply
If there is
shifted,
a decrease in demand and supply, the
increase
price
in
will be
both
constant.
demand.
Decrease in
And now,
equilibrium demand and supply.
so you said we have constant
There
what?
will be constant equilibrium price.
Okay, now I want to understand what you mean by constant equilibrium price, because definitely, let me quickly just see what can happen with this same curve. But this time around, it's going to be both supply and demand that shifted. Now, assuming this is the initial one, D0, it shifts down to D1. If we are to name this D0 and this one D1, if you are looking at the screen, now if
Okay.
we have a situation where we have, let me just copy. If we have another supply curve, let me shift it down. I'm trying to see what can happen if we use this same graph. So let's see. All right, so the explanation with this graph, assuming we are able to interpose another supply curve, assuming we have a new supply curve here. So it will definitely be somewhere here, because increase in supply, it will be another supply curve on this side. If you are looking at it, a decrease in supply will be here, and increase in supply will be here. Now, for a decrease in supply, if we have something here, definitely we will have it crossing the demand curve, because this is the decrease in demand. Demand, the initial one was here, it moved downward, because the question is both decrease in demand and decrease in supply. So we have decrease in demand here, then decrease in supply somewhere here. Now, if we have a new supply curve that cross this here, definitely we are going to have the point of intersection somewhere here. So that point of intersection will not give us a constant, it will not give us a constant one, because definitely we have a change, increase in price, decrease in supply, so in quantity, in equilibrium. If we are somewhere here, definitely the equilibrium point will be somewhere here. New equilibrium price will be here. new equilibrium quantity will be here. So if you are getting it right, we can't have any constant equilibrium. Equilibrium will not remain the same. So I hope that answered your question, Rahim. It can't be constant. So it's definitely not constant with this change that I explained just now. So let's